You ever just look at your drawing after you finish and there are smears, eraser marks, and random lines everywhere? And then you think to yourself, how did this happen? Yeah, this has to be a canon event for every artist. But don't worry, because there are ways to fix up and create much cleaner sketches when you're drawing. Like this one. It's just so beautiful. It's so perfect. And yes, this is a part 2 to how my lines are so clean because so many of you guys are still asking. And I'm happy to help. By the way, before we start, I understand that sketches are called sketches for a reason. They're supposed to be messy and rough, and not all of them are going to be squeaky clean. But this is for those of you who want that crispy look to your drawings. Anyways, I just had to say that because a lot of people were like, sketches are meant to be messy, so yeah. Alright, without further ado, let's get drawing. So in the previous video, we covered things like being patient and having steady hands. But I want to emphasize the importance of something I like to call follow-through. Now, you've probably heard this term in sports where when you're kicking, you want to lean your entire body into the kick and continue the momentum throughout the entire action. For example, when connecting 2 points, to avoid any shaky lines, you have to follow through the points you're trying to connect. You can see here I'm doing so by tapering off my line after I've reached the connection point, almost as if my line were to fade off. This also helps to create more fluidity in your sketches so that your characters don't look as flat or stiff. Because you can see that in this drawing where I didn't use this technique, it looks a little bland and just there. While this one feels much more immersive because I use follow-through lines. And using lines like these can also help vary your line weight, which creates more dynamic drawings. Because the truth is, if all your lines are the same shape and size, the drawing tends to look a little boring. But you can see in this example that using this technique creates thicker and darker lines in some spots, which contrast the lines around it. If you're new to using this method, try drawing long and smooth lines on a blank piece of paper like I am here. Practice the motion more than anything, using your arm to do most of the movement, and instead of stopping in the middle of longer lines, try following through the entire line with one motion. It does take practice, but it will literally transform your drawings. And yes, if you need to, you can also rotate your paper when you're drawing because, to be honest, some angles are harder than others to draw from. Now, the second thing I want to cover is something that you're probably already aware of, but it's super important. You need to press lightly when you're sketching. I know, you're probably saying, J-Marin, isn't that obvious? But so many newer artists make the mistake of pressing too hard, and then their drawings become hard to erase if you made a mistake. So I want to emphasize the importance of using very light lines whenever you're sketching. Look, I understand how tempting it is to press hard so that you can actually see your drawing, but you have to focus on hand control. This means that when you're drawing, you have to be aware of when you're pressing lightly and when you're pressing more firmly. For example, here is me pressing much harder in a drawing, and you can see when I try to erase it, it's very difficult. And it kind of left a mark too. On the other hand, if I were to press lightly with my pencil and if I were to make a mistake, it'd be much easier to erase and you wouldn't be able to tell that I even drew anything to begin with. This technique is more so for those of you who are trying to skip that stage of sketching where it's supposed to be rough and messy and are most likely using a reference image to draw one-to-one. So yeah, no matter what you're trying to draw, or even if you're using reference, just keep this in mind so that you can avoid any eraser marks that won't go away in the future. By the way, before we move on, if you're struggling with your art, I have in-depth lessons that cover anatomy, perspective, and shading. It's literally 2 extra hours worth of content that's waiting just for you. So if you're interested at all, it'll be the first link in the description of this video. Alright, let's get back to the video. Now that you have a better understanding of how to control the pressure of your pencil as well as following through with your lines, we can move on to another technique that I like to call the point-to-point method. Now, this one kind of gives it away in the name, but let's say you're in the middle of a drawing and you're unsure of where or how you want a certain line to look. You don't just want to place the line on the paper because then, well, it'll ruin your drawing. You can identify where the beginning of that line is and also where it should end. I like to do so by using simple dots that indicate where my line should kind of end up, if that makes sense. So that when I begin actually drawing the line, I have a clear vision of what I want it to look like and where I want it to end. This also works with curved lines too. For example, if I want a line to curve this way, then I'll begin by plotting the beginning and end points in between these 2 points so I know what direction my line will follow. And yes, I know that I'm saying line a lot, so just stop making fun of me. And in actuality, you can see that I use this in almost every single drawing where I use reference. And the cool thing about this technique is that it doesn't only have to be used for certain parts of your drawing. Say you're drawing a face, it can be used both for the facial features and the general outline of it. Or if you're drawing clothes, for example, you can use these points to identify exactly where you want the folds and how you want the clothes to look on your character. To put it very simply, it's basically just connecting the dots. Did you guys ever play those as a kid, by the way? It's like where they give you a paper and then you connect the dots and then it makes a drawing and then, you know, it looks cool, but it's pretty, you know what I'm talking about. Alright, so the next thing I want you to be aware of to create cleaner sketches is line economy. You may have heard of this term before, and if not, it simply refers to how many lines you're actually using in a given drawing. For example, I want you to ask yourself this question really quickly. When you're sketching, do you find yourself using a bunch of lines, or do you use longer, more complete strokes to create your sketches? And this doesn't mean you have to be chicken scratching either. Line economy simply refers to being aware of how many lines you're using. So if our goal is to create cleaner drawings, then what we can do is use less, more intentional lines. This doesn't mean you have to use one stroke for every single thing that you draw, but it does mean you have to have a clear vision of what you're drawing when you're drawing it. This is so you're not guessing where the lines go. So let's say I wanted to draw a clean sketch of a face. With every line that I put down, it's intentional and I layer my lines so that they look like one line. Of course, I'm beginning to press lightly like I showed you previously, but then I'm layering to add darker spots. It's similar to using the follow-through method where it helps create more dynamic line weight as well. You can see I'm still using multiple strokes to complete this drawing, but they layer each other perfectly enough to where it doesn't look scratchy, therefore looking like I have good line economy. One way you can improve your line economy is by using this simple practice method. Choose an object to draw and attempt to draw it with fewer and fewer lines every time. For example, if I wanted to draw an eye, I'm only laying down the lines that are intentional and have to be there for the drawing. This does take some time to get used to, but you will create much cleaner sketches in the long run. Finally, we're gonna go over something I went over the first video called ghosting. Now, if you watch my other video on clean sketches, then you'll probably be a little more familiar with this term. It's basically used to describe the technique where you hover over the paper with your pencil, mimicking the motion of your drawing before you actually draw. This works with things like circles and longer lines. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up again is because it goes hand in hand with the follow-through and point-to-point methods. One of the most important skills an artist can have is visualization, and ghosting helps with exactly that. Whenever you're using the follow-through or point-to-point method, you can begin by moving your arm or hand in the motion that you're wanting to draw. Remember to hover your hand slightly above the paper without actually touching it. And once you feel like you've prepared enough, you can actually begin drawing the line, making sure it's smooth and precise. And by the way, if you're using the point-to-point method, make sure to connect the dots and follow through with precision. So if you're using all of these three techniques at the same time in your drawing, it'll literally be deadly. So that's gonna wrap it up for today's video. And if you guys found it entertaining or useful, please feel free to drop a like because it just gives me more motivation to continue with these. And by the way, just thank you guys for all the love and support that you've been showing on my longer form videos so far. And as you guys can probably tell, I'm trying to come out with at least once a week, which is a good amount of work, but I do enjoy making them. And as always, my art course will be the very first link in the description of this video, as well as all my socials. And you guys showed a lot of love for that Discord art community idea, so I might be working on that. But nevertheless, thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you drawing.